Yesterday, Chief Justice Neuvillette and apparently Lord Duke His Grace Wriothesley's splash arts were released, and while everyone is probably rushing to speculate regarding the odd question marks present in Monsieur Neuvillette's introduction or widen their eyes at the idea of Duke Wriothesley being a Cerberus, I'm instead more inclined to think about how these very two important and powerful figures in Fontaine might work together systemically, which is what I'll talk about today. But before I get into the juicy stuff, if you think this kind of content is up your alley, please do consider subscribing to my channel if you want to catch more analyses on Genshin Impact characters and their social context. I've done quite a few videos on this already, so please do check those out. If you've checked out my old videos, then you'd know that I already have some preliminary character analyses on both Neuvillette and Wriothesley. Yes, Lord Duke His Grace Wriothesley, the guy who had never uttered a single word until today. I already offered some insights on both of these characters with an exploration on Chief Justice Neuvillette's sense of duty and impartiality and Lord Duke His Grace Wriothesley's approach to handling criminals. So far, I think my analysis of Neuvillette's sense of fairness is somewhat on the right track based on newer content, and with Wriothesley's case, my hopes of him being relatively kind to prisoners have been hinted at in his drip marketing, I think. But the new information that I hadn't really considered in my previous analysis is just how high his position could be. Although I did speculate recently that he might be the chief director of the Fortress of Meripede, which turned out to be close enough to the concept of administrator, I didn't really factor that into my previous analysis. I mentioned something along the lines of him having to reflect on whether he agrees with the objectives of the prison system, and now I think he basically decides the objectives of the prison system, so in some way that can allow him to align his personal beliefs with that of the institution he's in charge of, with him viewing his role as someone who gives convicts the opportunity to live well-ordered lives. And that's the thing, order. Both Chief Justice Neuvillette and Lord Duke His Grace Wriothesley deal with keeping the order within their respective systems, so there seems to be a potential common interest not only between Palais Mermonia and the Fortress of Meripede, but between themselves. Hence, even as independent organizations, it might be worth having alignment talks between them, because it would be really uncomfortable knowing that you've judged a trial so fairly only for the convict to be treated incredibly unfairly. And it's also weird to take care of prisoners while having this perpetual doubt in your mind about whether they're even meant to be there or not. So they either have to possess some level of mutual trust that they both know what they're doing, or they can just ignore all doubts. But with their sense of righteousness being hinted at as early as now, I don't think they'll really turn a blind eye to those potential issues. An interesting thing to see would be how Chief Justice Neuvillette and Lord Duke His Grace Wriothesley hold each other accountable. Do they have transparency reports? Does the Palais Mermonia send officers to conduct prison inspections? Does the Fortress of Meripede assist convicts in making appeals if they feel like their cases were mistried, if that's possible considering how Fontaine works? Or alternatively, do these two people also hold each other accountable personally, by confronting each other verbally to spark necessary conversations about how to fix things? Or even more interestingly, do they do combinations of systemic and personal means of holding each other accountable? If so, it would be really amusing to see that in action, and it would help mitigate some of Chief Justice Neuvillette's overwhelming degree of centralized authority, even if he doesn't necessarily abuse it. Heeding other government officials' opinions might help to push him towards an even better sense of fairness. I hope we get to see how the Fortress of Meripede adheres to legal proceedings, like if they need to bring prisoners to court to testify, or if Lord Duke His Grace Wriothesley himself needs to testify on some occasions when it comes to in-prison crimes, in case those still happen and if they actually hold trials for those. Or if the writ of habeas corpus exists in Fontaine, then Lord Duke His Grace Wriothesley or his subordinates need to present a prisoner in court if they want to know the reason why they're detained. Well, that's if the people are detained in the fortress of Meripede temporarily before being tried. It's also worth pondering how the Archon quest might change the status quo of how they view each other's institutions or even each other's moral sensibilities. Will one of them begin to doubt the other and work against them? I have that question because Fontaine's speculators have ascribed blue colors to the establishment and red to the underground or the oppressed class or something. However, Lord Duke His Grace Wriothesley's drip marketing introduction does paint him clearly as an establishment figure, and I can't really sense him going on such an extremely rebellious path. Maybe he will a little bit, but not to such a great extent. I mean, that may or may not be the case, but it's best not to assume yet as of now. It would be amusing, though, to see if they actually cooperate heavily to push forth for change in the Archon quest in an exciting build-up towards victory. Although I think it's more likely that a true alignment or realignment of goals would happen after the Archon quest is done already or as it is wrapping up. One question I have already is if the usage of the oratrice and or the public trial system end up being abolished, will Lord Duke His Grace Wriothesley expect a decrease or an increase in the influx of prisoners coming into the fortress of Meripede? And I wonder how he's going to prepare for such a change. Another important thing to consider here is actually Sigewinne, because Chief Justice Neuvillette seems to serve as a father figure of all the Melusines, and she also seems to be taken care of by Lord Duke His Grace Wriothesley in some capacity. Of course, there's the cute possibility of Sigewinne being like their shared daughter figure, but aside from that, does this mean that the Fortress of Meripede pushes for Melusine job opportunities according to Chief Justice Neuvillette's wishes, or is Sigewinne the only exception? Either way, their shared approach towards Melusine inclusivity might help to put them on the same page regarding some other things. I don't know. Additionally, I noticed from the drip marketing that titles like Baron are bestowed onto Fontainian individuals by the Palais Mermonia, which is Chief Justice Neuvillette's office. So does this mean that Lord Duke His Grace Wriothesley has received the title of Duke from the same institution? And if so, how did he earn it? And is this a sign of him gaining the favor of the Iudex? Hopefully that'll get explained one day, not only for the sake of expounding on the relationship between these two characters, but also giving us a hint about a possible meritocracy system where people get royal titles based on accomplishments instead. Then it would be relevant to learn if all Fortress of Meripede administrators have gained that title in the past, or do only a few of them have that privilege? And what does Lord Duke His Grace Wriothesley even think of his own title? Basically, the questions and or speculations I have around both Chief Justice Neuvillette and Lord Duke His Grace Wriothesley revolve around both systemic and personal cooperation, and what the implications of those will be when it comes to the overall integrity of Fontaine's justice system, and the Duke's contribution to helping spread out power within the government. And yes, of course, this is an excuse for them to interact. They just have to. They're my favorites, so I gotta see them have only the most intriguing voice lines about each other, or else, what is even the point? Anyway, with that said, I will now conclude my ramble on why Chief Justice Neuvillette and Lord Duke His Grace Wriothesley really have to meet on screen for lore and world-building reasons, and totally not just because I like the idea of these two adorable characters on screen with their opposite color palettes. So yeah, that's about it. If you want more coherent analysis on their individual merits, I would recommend these older videos of mine to help you get pumped up for seeing these characters on screen this week for our dear Iudex and next patch for our lovely administrator. And please do make sure to subscribe to this channel if you like my Fontaine take so far. That's all for today, and I'll see you when Fontaine actually comes out. Man, I'm so impatient, huh?